So this portrait is going to be done with conte and charcoal. So I'll start it off with charcoal and then move on to conte once um, I'm happy with the proportions and where everything sort of lays within the composition. So first thing I want to do is get that sense of the crosshairs, and then figure out where I want the chin to end. So I have essentially that triangular part of the face kind of established, and then take that distance and half it. So I'll take that distance there, cut in half, roughly. I can take that measurement, roughly there, and then I'll take that same measurement and bring it up, and then transfer back in space, and that should give me pretty roughly well proportioned head. All right, so brow ridge, center line, brow ridge, and then take the distance from the brow ridge to where I want the chin to end, and then cut that distance in half, and roughly I have the bottom of the nose. So I might have to make a couple of adjustments here and there, but generally this is going to be a good sort of starting point. And then I go for the glabella, the space between the eyes right on the bridge of the nose, and then get the projection of the nose roughed out. And then how the lips project outwards. The distance from the bottom of the nose to the chin, roughly, should be a half, be the corner of the mouth. And again, I'm just roughing this in. It's like a quick gesture. I'm not going to commit to anything just yet, but I want to get a sense of whether I like where all of these shapes are going to end up. So the faster you do this part, the more time you have to do everything else. Right? Looking for that shadow. See how that shadow falls on top of the nose, so over the eyes, and then for the eyes, I'll make sure that I get a sense of the edge of the nose or the side plane of the nose. So I go for the tear duct, and that helps me establish that this nose has a side, and that also helps me establish the other tear duct on the opposite side. Right? And eyelid makes sure that these things line up. It's really easy to get things out of alignment, and then things start to look kind of odd. So here I get the angle of the brow ridge towards the side of the head. Right? Going to the mouth gives me roughly the idea of where the jaw might end, and then this area here is going to give me the angle of the brow ridge, but also kind of coincides with the angle of the hairline. In this case, the hairline is tapering back, the width of the hairline, and then it's the ear. The ear kind of lines up a little bit of an angle like that, so that's the top of the ear. I want to make sure that I'm checking those angles. So this angle is like this to that ear, and then the nose is going to follow roughly the same angle. So if I have a rough idea of where the ear might lie, the sideburn is, the ear canal, right, I can then get a sense for the jaw connected to the front of the face. Right, behind the ear, I'm going to find the sternocleidomastoid muscle. That's going to taper towards the pit of the neck. Right, throat, the other sternocleidomastoid, so somewhere around there. Here, the erector spinae, and then the trapezius, and then we'll have the shirt coming in front of that. And something like this. I can come back and edit all of this stuff afterwards, but right now I have a general good sense of the space and proportions, and then I'll double check, make sure that everything is falling in roughly the right vicinity. I look also at the negative spaces, make sure that it looks roughly correct. And then I start looking for those shapes of shadow so that I can map that out and include that in include that in the general structures of the light and shadow mask, mapping out the shapes of light and shadow, ensuring that once I start giving this a sense of value, right, we're only going to be doing a value drawing. Once I get that established, it's going to help me then correct even further or get more accurate proportions. This nose seems a little big to me. I'm gonna have to shave it down a little bit. I like it better there. That looks fine. That looks fine. Looks a little thin. So it might be that the ear needs to be a little wider. I'm about 7 minutes in, and it's roughly laid out. Any more, now we're getting into specifics. So the next thing I want to do is select the areas of light and shadow, and then start putting in those values. All of this here. All of this is in shadow, so I'm going to give it a light value. Group the larger masses of value first, and then I can push within those shapes of shadow. I can push some shadows even further, and then I'll do the same thing with the lights. I'll pull the lights a little bit more wherever I need that, but right now I want to group as much as possible to get the larger shapes working, and then I'll be more particular about the smaller shapes. But I don't want to spend any time doing small shapes right now. I want to get within 10 minutes, get everything generally mapped out, so then the next 10 minutes is getting a little bit more accurate with the proportions. So after we're about 10 minutes in and we got the larger shapes of shadow mapped out, we can go ahead and start unifying the surface, adding some general tone towards the light masses. Probably need a little bit more charcoal, so instead I'm going to use this conte. It's going to be more permanent. So there's some of that wherever I see darker shapes of value. I'm going to push that around a little bit too. just to give me some value shift and contrast from the background as well. You can also use a chamois for this, but the idea is to get everything nicely spread out and get some tone in the lighter areas. So now I can start pulling out some of the shapes of light and these halftones and establishing the areas that are strictly going to be light. So this area here is going to take some white. So I want to clear that out so that I can put white there. And then I want to clear this area out because again, this is going to take light. I'll make sure that the white and the black conte do not mix together. Then you get this sort of milky appearance to it. And as I'm doing this, I'm trying to improve also those shapes of light and shadow. And the areas where I want to keep the focus. So I'm not going to go too much in here. I'll use a smaller eraser for that. And here I want to pull this out. I want to get that sense of that muscle of the buccinator coming forward. The chin. And the neck. Maybe a little bit here. A little bit on this fill light that's happening behind the head a little bit. The ear will get a little bit of attention, but I won't do that until later. So from this point on, I essentially just go back into the shapes of shadow and start developing them with a little bit more detail and getting a little closer to the actual shapes that I see for each of the specifics of the facial features, like the eyes, the nose, lips, ear, that kind of stuff. So just to ease the time that you spend watching this, I'm going to speed up the rest of the video. I will start explaining again roughly around the time that I start working on the lights to kind of describe a little bit about how it is that I would approach beginning to work on the light mass. So once I wrap up um, generally getting everything situated in the shadows, I then start going into the lights and start developing the light mask, beginning with the highest point or the lightest light in that section of the form, and then establishing an area so that the white begins to go towards the shapes of shadow. At first, I start very stark, and with the blending stump, I'll start to soften some of those edges. And it's typical that once I start doing that, I want to then start pushing the shapes of value in the shadow mask as well, and getting a little bit more detail, so I have a better sense of like what my value range is going to be. And you'll see me in here going back and forth now with the blending stump, going into the shapes of shadow and pushing those areas, and then again going back into the shapes of light and also pulling those areas until it begins to look a little bit more volumetric. So from here on out, it's essentially just making adjustments. Sometimes I'll go into the areas around the head, sometimes into the background. Any place that's going to help me get a better sense of that portrait sitting in that environment and feeling as though it belongs in there, and getting a sense of the space being also utilized so that I don't have to resort to outlines to describe the form. Whenever you feel like you have to describe something with an outline or with a hard edge, it's very likely what you need is actually a shift in value. So uh, as I go around here and trying to finish up the portrait, what I do is I'm adjusting the values, I'm improving the shapes of light and shadow, and I'm balancing the two, um, shapes versus value versus detail versus texture. I'm trying to balance everything so that by the time that I stop, it looks as though I intended to stop there, and not so much as though I ran out of time or I didn't know what else to do. And also, every bit of detail and texture that you add to this should also be something that isn't localized just in one particular area. And what you leave in and what you take out should also be something that you consider. What is going to strengthen the portrait, um, matters, and what might weaken the portrait also matters. And step away, take a break, look around, give it some time to sort of rest, especially when you're working from a photo. Don't overdo it. It's not about copying the photo mimetically, it's about creating a drawing that is photo referenced but not photo dependent.